So thank you so much for joining us. This is the second in a series of 3 of the Cube Thinking webinars that we're providing as part of the hashtag Ask for Help support that you probably are all familiar with and have probably all had some engagement with to a different degree, which is about helping Lancashire businesses through this challenging time. And our dream is businesses go from surviving to thriving. That's kind of the key bit. So the point of difference, I guess, for these webinars is we do expect there to be learning outcomes. We tend to do 3 modules, and of each of the modules, ideally you'll be taking some notes and you'll be learning as you go. Your head won't hurt, but your head will get used during this session. The clue's in the name, Cube Thinking. We hope we will bring some thoughts and enable some thinking, which will assist. So housekeeping, you all know the fire exits in your own homes. I'm not expecting any fire alarms. You know where the toilet refreshments areas are in your own homes too. From a courtesy point of view, if you can put all your cameras on, that would be wonderful, unless there's a weak signal point. If you want to, in the chat section, to ask any questions at all, pop them in. We will ask questions at the end of each module, but if you have a burning question, pop it in there, because sometimes you just can't remember till the end of the 15 minutes. Totally get that. And then similar to last time, at the end, we'll hang around in the room after 2:30 if anybody would like to have any further conversations. I've probably forgot something crucial. John, have I?
No, perfect.
Okay, so we've got 2 wonderful guest speakers today. You are in for a treat. Also, just to confirm, we will be recording this. We are recording this simply because there'll be some gold dust which is in there, and you tend to get a lot more hits after the event rather than during. Has anybody any objections before we start?
No.
Okay, just in GDPR compliance, Information Commissioner, just wanted to check that's the case. So we've got Mark Gibbons who'll be doing the second part, if you will, but sections modules 1 and 2 are going to be delivered by the fantastic Pam. So I'm going to pass you over to Pam Duxbury. You're in for a treat.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully we can make it interesting. It can be a bit dry, finance, and hopefully I don't come under the banner of a boring accountant. What we're trying to do with within the Boost programme was to look at how we can help you help yourselves, or maybe there's other coaches in the room and how they can help their clients. And what we're looking to achieve after this webinar is that you'd have an idea of how to shape and pull some information together to be able to do some decision making. And potentially maybe obtain some external finance, which obviously is quite high on the agenda for a lot of businesses at the moment. And obviously we're never sure what our audience is in terms of whether you have staff or whether you're just on your own, managing your own finances. So I've tried to make it as generic as possible, but I'll try and cover if you're on your own and if you're within a larger business. It can be hard to relate that to yourself if you're just in a business on your own. And you know, one of the themes that we're looking at is accounting in a crisis. And you know, I would just start with number 1, and you know, self-care. And you know, there's a lot about self-care at the moment. You know, we're in very difficult times. None of us will have ever experienced this. And I can say from personal experience, I've been accounting in a crisis. I've had a couple of businesses that I've been in that were very close to going to the wall. And from a personal perspective, and it's easy to say it in hindsight, but you know, genuine advice is you need to look after yourself. I didn't, because you don't tend to, because you're in a really stressed situation. But it absolutely does help if you can take time out or give yourself quiet space to think about things, which I know may not be easy at the moment, but that would absolutely help you get through it. And ask for help. You know, there's the hashtag there, which is throughout all of the Boost literature at the moment. But also, you know, is there, you know, have you got a friend, a like-minded friend you can bounce things off? Your accountant, you know, some may be paid services. You may need to bring your accountant in. But, you know, in terms of accounting in a crisis, you know, the mantra is you need to know your numbers. You need to know where you're at. And we're going to look at how you can get to the numbers. You know, you need to know how long your money will last, how much money you need, and what is your exit going to be. And that'll probably make more sense as we move through. So if we go next slide. So in terms of knowing your numbers, you know, obviously I don't know what everybody's accounting system is, even if you have one. You know, 75% of businesses in Lancashire are below 4 employees. So that, you know, the vast majority of us are either on our own or with a very small team. You may have your accountant or an external bookkeeper that does the management accounts for you. You know, can you have, how up to date are they? Do you have a cash flow forecast? You know, and it's just what information you have around with you. Are your taxes up to date? Do you know where your loans and instalments on HP are? And you know, finally, that will all be critical to getting you to your solution. So it's just a case of what information do you have available, which may sound really obvious, but you may not even know where to start if they're not up to date. So on the next slide, we can look at getting to your numbers. So if you've got management accounts and you've got a forecast, you're at the point where you can then start looking strategically at where you're at and make some decisions. You know, you can see maybe how much cash you have left, what you need to get into the business. But if you don't have that available, what I wanted to do was just give you some pointers as to how you could start bringing that together. So if you, you know, a good starting point is get hold of your last 3 months of bank statements from your bank account. Have a look at what's been coming in and going out, and can you put that together in a simple spreadsheet, and that will give you some building blocks to just start building from. Because, you know, some accountants are furloughing staff, you may not have your accountant available. We've certainly had feedback on a lot of the surveys that I think it was around 60 or 70% hadn't had any contact from their accountants. But don't be afraid to ask, and obviously it may be difficult if you're thinking, well, I can't afford to pay for any help, you know, and that's where Mark will come in, who's going to speak later as well. But if you start trying to build what your regular costs are, it gives you an idea of what those overheads are, and obviously you can start reviewing those, you know, in terms of can you get payment holidays and that kind of thing, which we'll come on to in your way out of the crisis. But the biggest thing is to get a grip on where your numbers are. Once you started looking at, do you have a set of accounts, your last set of accounts that were done, or your last up-to-date management accounts, and maybe you can just compare the figures. And I know it's not easy if you're not a finance person, but it'll give you a starting point, because if you've got 3 months, hopefully that would be about a quarter of the cost that you're looking at, and does it make sense? You know, and again, ask for help, you know, Boost, accountant, friends. You know, when I was in you know, some very sticky situations, and I'm a chartered accountant by background, but the stress of it can just make it very difficult, you know. And I'm fortunate, I have lots of friends that are accountants, but that's one thing that I did was I had a friend come and help me, and she sat down and we started building cash flows together, because I just couldn't think, you know. And I want to say that because it's kind of, you're not on your own, and don't feel bad if that's the way you think. Some people can't see the wood for the trees, but hopefully just making a start may help. Next slide. So once you've started pulling those figures together, that would give you an idea. That would give you an idea of what your costs are. So basically start at the bottom. What are your costs? What do you have to meet? Then look, you know, what income is coming in? What do I know I've got coming in? You know, and when does the cash potentially run out? So if you've got an idea then of what your shortfall may be, if there's going to be a shortfall, and that will help you plan how you plug the shortfall, and we can either look at, you know, can we get the income up, which may not be possible, how do we reduce the costs? So next slide. So this is how much money do you need, you know, how much cash is there, can you cut, can you negotiate some terms or payment holidays, and also don't overestimate, you know, particularly if you're going to go on to raise some finance, if you kind of over egg the position, you know, a funder may just say no, but obviously Mark could cover that. There just need to be accurate numbers that you can back up, but obviously have enough in there, because some people may not actually ask for enough, or they might be over optimistic, and that's where a sense check may help. But in terms of, you know, there's lots of initiatives out there. Obviously there's the grant funding, there's if we look at the next slide, you know, what will help you once you've established that shortfall. So when you've got that shortfall, what is it that's going to fix your business? Is it, you know, you may have a business that once your doors can open, you'll be back to normal. Obviously nobody knows what's going to happen with the economy, but there may be, you know, if you're a hairdresser, you're probably going to be working double shifts, Saturday, Sundays, all the way back, because you've got people like me that are just remaining blonde. But it's that kind of thing. What is your business, and what will bring those sales back in? You may be a business at the moment where actually you've been overwhelmed with work, and that can create cash flow problems on its own, because maybe you've got a huge demand for your product, and you're making sales, or likewise your sales may have just evaporated overnight. And you know, so I think it's understanding, because if you're going to go for any finance, I think it's understanding what you need to recover. So what are the prospects of your sales recovering? Can you innovate in any way? Can you diversify in any way and bring that income in? Cutting costs, you know, maybe you pay rent, maybe you can negotiate with landlords. Some are being very receptive and helpful, some are not. You know, and I think that's probably the government's thinking with the mortgage holidays, is that could filter down where there's rentals at the bottom. So maybe if somebody gets a 3-month mortgage holiday, they could then offset that and give somebody a 3-month rent holiday. You know, and that's obviously ideal world. And you know, I've spoken to some people on the business surgeries where their landlords are not very receptive at all. I have a client that is a landlord of some quite large office complexes. Fortunately, they're not debt financed, but they've taken a very pragmatic view and said they would extend people's leases by the amount of rent-free period they give them. Because ultimately they would need to find a replacement tenant. So it is in their interest to try and work with you if they can. There's mortgage holidays. Obviously there's new grants coming out, and I think once we kind of start coming out of lockdown and out of the initial storm, so to speak, there may be a lot of grant funding that comes around, but obviously nobody knows what that may be. Some exits might be you just need to sell the business maybe. I know that's probably not something a lot of people are considering at the moment. Business I was in, which was a football club, that's generally your only exit, is for it to be bought by a new owner. But it's just considering what all of those options may be. And but the mantra all the way through that is you've got to know your numbers to be able to make some decisions around that. I mean, if you have staff, it's around furlough. You know, a lot of people are starting to consider redundancies now. You know, and I would just say, obviously, you've got to keep a really close eye on HR, you know, because HR rules still apply, you know, and employment law applies. So it's just being mindful of that in the decisions that you're making if you do have staff. And obviously the government's initiative around the furlough was that it would buy people time to see what the end result may be out the other side, and they're hoping as many businesses as possible will just be as business as usual. But none of us know what the new normal is going to be. But in terms of knowing those numbers, it's then helping you make decisions as to how long you may be able to last. And I would say you need to be honest with yourself about the business. You know, we've seen a whole spectrum of businesses, that some were new and startups and maybe not able to access some of the initiatives that are available. You know, I know some that have been kind of coming into their mature and growth acceleration phases, which is some of the businesses that John, Jay and myself are working with. You know, and I know certainly with some of my clients, they feel like they've probably gone back 5 or more years, perhaps. But I think what you need to do is just being able to bring that information together and access whatever help you've got available. So I think I'll throw it open to questions.
We'll all unmute. We'll all unmute. So there's some incredible relevance there with the themes that you've put in through, and get to know your numbers. And looking at the number of people who are out there, how many people feel that they really know their numbers? Can you put your hand up if you think that you do really know your numbers? Okay, and from what is it that's making you know your numbers more than perhaps others? Because the stuff that Pam is saying is resonating, and that checklist is what you've been following?
Yeah, I have a really good accountant. She does my my accounts every single month. I had my bank rec and latest accounts through at 9:30 this morning. And if I've got any questions, anything, I just actually ring her straight away, and she answers them and she sorts it out. She actually uses Xero, so I just literally send all my stuff through Xero, and it's done straight away. It's easy.
So that's real, Claire. That's an amazing insight. That the reason I say that is we've been doing a study. So during the Ask for Help, we dealt with, let's say, about 120 odd businesses, 125 businesses, and of those businesses, over half said they'd never heard, they'd had no contact from their accountant at all.
I have to be honest.
Yeah.
She is also my sister.
Right.
So I speak to her every day near enough, but
so
we always set aside I like the first Wednesday, Thursday, every month, try and speak in work hours only, knowing that's all we talk about. That's it.
But Claire, we should have asked a second question. If you're in contact with your accountant, are they family?
I have to be honest.
It can work against you.
I have to be honest. Mum, Dad, and my sister, my brother-in-law, know like all work in finance. So I just go to them and ask them.
That's brilliant. I think this is incredibly, it's proving the point that it's difficult to know your numbers, to use your phrase, if you can't get hold of your accountants.
So
Yeah.
one thing that that a lot of companies that we've seen over the space of the surgeries that we've been holding is a lot of companies don't really understand what the break-even points are. Is that a feeling within the room? Does everyone understand what the break-even figures are? Or how much do you have to earn on revenue to pay all your fixed costs?
Yeah, we had all that.
And I think there's I think one thing that would be interesting to understand from Pam would be, you know, what sort of information every month should they be looking at? You know, like as a scorecard. Pam?
Yeah, well, I think in terms of if you've got the systems where, you know, I'll assume you'll have management accounts. A lot of what you tend to do is compare, and is it in line with what you expected? And a lot of work that we do with our clients is trying to make them forecast, and then has it been as expected? And the most difficult thing with a forecast and starting, which I should say, is basically starting with a finger in the air, really. You know, people just, you know, and I've done it myself, you know, where on earth do I start with this? How am I going to build this up? And I think that's kind of where I was saying with the, you know, if you haven't got access to any other information, you know, build it up from your bank statements, which is obviously a cash issue. But in terms of looking at where you should be, if you know where you think you're going to be, and then comparing it to where you actually are, and then understanding why you weren't where you expected to be. So we, you know, it's basically looking at variances. So have you, you know, what's gone on in the month? So some of the manufacturing companies we work with, it might be, well, if they have downtime on machinery, you know, if you're a service industry, it might be if you will have had clients cancel, or actually I got a lot more clients than I expected and that's why I'm higher, or, you know, and I think in terms of looking at where your break-even point is, obviously what you need to bring in over and above your costs. Now there's two, there's one for profit break-even, and there's obviously your cash flow. So you can be very profitable and be running out of cash because you could have things stockpiled, money tied up in debtors. So you've earned the money on paper, but you haven't physically obtained the cash. And, you know, I think people struggle to, some people only monitor their cash. And, you know, and I've had clients that have been in this position where they've been very cash rich and not realising they're actually losing money. You know, I had one client that was in particular, he stopped withdrawing money from the business because he didn't need it to live off, but hadn't realised the business was actually going backwards. And I think it's understanding those kinds of things that are going on is the difference between your profit and your cash. And actually what cash, you know, this is all about cash, you know, because you can't do anything without the money. You know, how much cash have you got to keep going? And then have you actually got the profitability? Because, you know, this again will come into Mark's part, is that the underlying business has to be profitable. You know, you could be generating loads of cash and it'll be spinning round. But you know, ultimately it's understanding, you know, at the moment cash is critical.
Pam, I wasn't being rude looking down. I'd made some notes from the data analysis that we'd done. Now, from Lancashire, from the small section of businesses that we had interacted with in the last 5 or 6 weeks, and this one I'm just looking then, 88% of businesses have only enough cash for 90 days. So that's, they factor in whatever the cash burn is of those particular businesses. The clock's ticking, isn't it, for businesses to get the house in order where possible, to get financially fit and to get to drop down that break-even point, do you think?
Yeah, and you know, I mean, I would say 90 days isn't too bad in a lot of respects.
It was, I mean, a big proportion of that was within 1 month.
Yeah, so I you know, I would say most people can only last a month generally. I mean, I would say if you're going to look at reserves, you want at least 3 months worth, really. Now, obviously, nobody predicts something like a pandemic where you might be, you know, interrupted for over 3 months. potentially.
So there's opportunities here as well, because like I say, the majority of businesses are micro businesses, you know, under 10 people within Lancashire. Well, in fact, throughout the whole of the UK. But there should be. Is there like a standard spreadsheet that we could share with everybody, just to show, you know, their incomes and their outgoings, to help them get a gauge on what sort of cash projections they've got?
I mean, I've got a cash flow projection. It may be. I mean, we train people to use that, but you know, I'm happy to share a cash flow template if anybody wants one.
Yeah, I just think that you know, we talk about having management accounts and everyone talking about them and looking at them every month. You know, I think there's probably going to be a big percentage of people who actually it's bigger their finger in the air and hope that the bank balance the following month is going to be better than this month.
Yeah.
But I think what we're trying to get people to understand in this program is actually what we want to do is move you all to the next level. So to take your finances a little bit more serious, to actually do some analysis every month, not really detailed, but just those top level figures, to, you know, making sure that you understand what the sales that's coming through, how much you've invoiced, how much cash you should be coming in, but actually then how much you're going to be spending. You know, how much you're expecting coming out of your business on a monthly basis.
So, but yeah, we had a couple of people now with requests for the cash flow template, so that would be absolute gold dust. Thank you.
So, are you all right for the next slide?
Yeah. So, again, we thought we would touch on internal controls, and just on the internal controls. I mean, obviously, this means different things to different businesses. You know, big businesses' internal controls is about separating duties between people. Obviously, if you're working on your own or with a very small team, it's looking what processes you have in place. You know, and that might be who can access your bank, who can access, you know, your HMRC portals, who runs the payroll. So it's what processes have you got, and what safety nets have you got in place if there's something you can't do. You know, it's useful to have a bit of a checklist. I would say, you know, I have loads of lists, but, you know, do you have a checklist? You know, have you paid? Are you up to date with your taxes? You know, have you paid things on time? Do you know when things are due? If you've not got things on automated payments. And like I say, it's probably more relevant if you've got staff for some of these, but how do you access the bank? If you were to be ill, who can access your business details? You know, I saw from a firm of solicitors that I work with, they're having to go to the High Court because a sole director of a company had died. You know, and that's where your corporate power of attorneys would come in. And it's considering those kinds of things, particularly in the environment that we're in, is, you know, who can pick up the pieces if you can't do those? Have you got, you know, passwords that your partner may at least have? Maybe it might not work in your business. Is there something someone, your accountant, can have then? You know, and it's just thinking around that, who can unlock the door if you can't. And I think it's just worth giving a bit of consideration to that. You know, what is your backup plan? What's your disaster plan? Do you need one? You know, I mean, it's slightly more complicated if you have a limited company, but it's worth giving some thought to those things. So there wasn't an awful lot on the internal controls, but some of the businesses that I'm working with, you know, we put procedures in place, because not, you know, we have a couple of people that can, in one company, can access the bank, and it's like, well, what's going to happen if they become ill and they can't work whilst we're all working from home? So we have plans in place to go and collect their bank token and do it. Now, whilst that's technically breaching banking protocols, that was the backstop position, to just be able to keep the business trading for, you know, 2 to 3 weeks if they were missing from the business. So it's worth considering. And Claire may be okay with her sister, who's the accountant, but it is worth giving some thought to that. You know, what happens to your business and your business bank account, and keeping your taxes up to date. You know, and it's important, particularly if one of your routes out of you know, difficulties you may be facing is finance, is because one of the criteria for some of the help is the fact that your taxes are already up to date before this. You know, and I think there's different businesses that we're coming across, some that were maybe teetering a little bit on the edge before the crisis, and this is completely pulling the rug and tipping them over the edge, and some businesses that were going along quite happily, and actually it's just turned the world upside down. But it's about you being a bankable proposition if debt finance may be your way out of this, and also getting help from people that may be around you if you've got to renegotiate with creditors, you know, trade creditors or your landlord, or, you know, if you've always paid bang on the dot, up to date, you know, you will have a lot of credibility with them, and the more credible you are, the more easy you can help. I think you've requested, should anybody else other than your accountant have details, you could have a corporate power of attorney, you could have a solicitor. You know, I suppose you could have it with your will, if you know, I mean, it's probably more of a problem in some respects if you die than if you have a stroke, because there's more tools available if you're no longer alive. You know, and I think, you know, I know on a personal level I'm putting powers of attorneys in place for my parents, and it's exactly the same principle. So it is worth giving some consideration to those kinds of things. Any questions?
Hey Pam. So one thing that's come out of all of the questions as well in our surgeries is people have gone from really worrying about what's going to happen as soon as the lockdown came in place, because the world's have been turned upside down. I think over the last 6 weeks, everyone started to get some kind of realization that, you know, actually there's a way through this. But how would you recommend that they do like the forecasting now as far as cash flow over the next few weeks, months?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would maybe try and be pessimistic. You know, I always go worst case scenario, so I know what I'm looking at, and then, you know, this might be, well, this is what I think, and this is what the worst case can be. And I think this was, again, knowing your break even, and knowing, you know, worst case is, you know, if your overheads are, you know, £2,000 a month, you've got at least £2,000 a month to bring in. You know, you think, well, actually, I think I'm going to come out of this and it'll be £1,500 a month. Well, you know, you've got £500 a month to find, but you don't know how long you might have to find it for. Now, obviously, there's things that people need to consider is like phased return to work. So you may not have, you know, we don't know what's going to be announced, but, you know, maybe you're going to have to stagger your staff. You know, maybe there's a cost implication to having split shifts. Maybe, you know, people will come back on a rota basis, or they may be, you know, I certainly think a recommendation is if you can work from home, still work from home, remain at home working if you can. I think that I've already heard that. So I think it's just a case of trying to predict it. There'll probably be a phasing of it, so don't think it's all going to come back on day one, and be realistic and just be honest with yourself, I think.
And Pam, Pam, do you think there should be any extra contingency cost that people should factor in that they may not have thought of, that the situation has risen or has made?
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is, we just don't know. You know, there might be a second wave. You know, nobody could predict that. You know, so I would just be as pessimistic and as worst case scenario as possible. I mean, I'm an accountant. I would be conservative. You know, entrepreneurs tend to be quite optimistic, and that's what makes them, you know, what makes you great at what you all do. But I think it's just trying to be conservative, I think.
So if you had, so if people wanted a cash flow projection chart, which is really a simple Excel spreadsheet that you've completed the details, to be honest, you could actually do you could do different scenarios, couldn't you, on that cash flow?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do that. I do one scenario and then I might save the sheet out as, you know, if it's, you know, if it's this, this is my raining forecast and this is my sunny forecast, and have a look at where you fall maybe in between the two.
So then we'll open up for questions. So if anyone's got a question, put your hand up and then we'll unmute. If there's any questions for Pam. Yeah, Judith. Okay, you're unmuted.
I mean, insofar as our business is concerned, we're very seasonal. We make chutneys and preserves. So essentially, this year we've virtually written off because nothing is going to happen for us. All our main events have now been cancelled. Our last one was the Southwood Flower Show, which was the end of August. And so that's now been cancelled. So we've no stream of incomes for insofar as our busy period is concerned, which is June through to August. So insofar as our cash flow projections are concerned, they're out the window. And we're hoping that the government funds will fill that breach in some way. But moving forward, we obviously need to be optimistic insofar as moving onwards from August through to Christmas, really.
So presumably you're relying on the events for the bulk of your sales?
That and wholesale. We've got two big wholesalers who we supply, and they closed the doors and that was it. So it's relevant. We rely on 50% more or less 50% wholesale, 50% cash sales.
I mean, the biggest thing. Well, I was just going to say the biggest thing out of that is in terms of innovation. Can is maybe trying to look at how much you can convert to online selling. So maybe when you're at the events, do you people then how do they repurchase from you after they've purchased from you?
Yeah, we have actually done that as a bit of a we do talk to people, we tell them we have a Facebook page, and in the past a lot of people have contacted us through Facebook or Instagram to ask for more product. And with the COVID situation, when everything stopped in mid-March, we put together a very quick online store using one of the card readers that we have when we're out and about. So and we were able to do that free. Some of them charge, and if you don't know if it's going to work, you're paying out money for nothing. But we had a free one, and we set that up, and it's okay. It's not brilliant, but it is bringing in some income, and we're pushing that out. I'm doing some work through social media, which is not my favourite thing, but I'm pushing myself, and we're doing a lot of posting. So we're trying to keep that going, and from our point of view, that's our innovation. I've also tried to contact local people to do like a local box. We know, obviously, as artisan producers, we know a lot in the area. So I'm trying to pull something together with that as well.
Judith, pop your details on the chat. We all love a bit of chutney.
Will do.
But coming out of this, I'll just say quickly that a lot of the people that we've been working with have been coming up with the alternatives of maybe an online shop that then becomes a permanent solution, and actually a new stream of income for you, and an easier way to deliver. So I would say maybe that's there may be grant funding around for some of that innovation, and maybe coming up you may be able to get funding, but that looks like a good path forward for you anyway, to get repeat sales.
Yeah, it's beginning to work that way, so we're hoping that it will continue. Including my daughter bought some, and I said, well, you don't have to, you're our daughter. And she said, no, I'm working, you're not, so I'll pay for it at the moment. So which is nice.
Okay.
Judith, if you've got 15 minutes, there's a video we did with a wine shop, Turton Wines, and they went totally digital in the space of a couple of weeks. Now, the Turton Wines, they, as well as selling wines, they sell cheese. You can see where this is going, can't you?
Yeah.
So the point being is, there's often others who've gone digital who may have the mechanisms and the customer database, but they'd love a bit of chutney too. So, there's opportunities out there, and I know the focus is on finance here, but nobody's left alone. pop your details on here now. You put them on. Brilliant stuff. Heritage
Yeah.
Range Reserves.
Can I also point out as well that part of this programme is being delivered for Boost, part of Lancashire County Council let, and there's also a great deal of support and advice also available through Boost. So there's other programmes that are available. There's Boost Mentoring, there's Boost Bespoke programme. Any startups under 3 years old, there's the GSP programme as well. So all of these are fully funded programmes. So what we would advise you to do is that at the end of this programme, if there is any additional help and support that you do want, then please go back to the Ask for Help, go and put your names and put on the contact details, or ring the number, and you'll be put through to some of our brilliant BRMs, the business relationship managers, and they'll have a good chat with you over the phone, and they'll be able to point you in the right directions.
We did actually, one of the things with the social media is because one of the business managers, Emma, contacted me a few weeks ago and said, how can we help? And we identified that our weakness is social media and marketing, because neither of us have a lot of sort of history of that. We have lots of other skills, but not that. So I have got a mentor who's actually pushing me quite hard to do these things. So, it's starting to work, and it's making us stop and think again as well, and try and look at different ways of doing the business. So it's hopefully it'll go forward. And one of the ideas you were saying, Jason, about other artisans is we know a cheesemaker, somebody who does meat, cakes, I think bread, and I've also contacted somebody who has a small barista, which they've had to shut at the moment, but they've offered to take our stuff on a milk run that they do.
Well, there's amazing opportunities out there. There really is, and all of this kind of stuff, going back to Pam's point, can assist your cash flow. These new income streams, some places, and Richard's on here who went totally digital, and his stuff's going through the roof. So sometimes it can happen, and the digital revolution can get you with a big whoosh.
Yeah.
There's a
link as well.
Just one point on that. 45% of people who are dealing with the customers differently are preferring the digital. So just one thing to be aware of that. So thanks for that, Pam. Absolutely brilliant insight there for the financials.
Thank you.
We'll move swiftly into Mark Gibbons from Access to Finance. He's chomping at the bit. I'll just unmute him. So he's ready to start. And Mark's going to give us a good understanding now of the external financial controls. So thanks very much, Mark.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's nice to see so many friendly faces in the audience. A few people that I've already met personally, which is quite nice. So yeah, just really looking at a bit of an overview, a little bit on a quick basis, what Access to Finance do in a normal scenario, and then how we've sort of adapted really to make sure that our offering is relevant during this pandemic of COVID-19, what options are out there. It seems to be that it's a very sort of fast-moving environment. There's lots of different government-backed schemes that are out there, but which one's appropriate? That could be the difficulty, and that could be the minefield. So maybe once you've identified what the route that you're going to take in terms of funding is, well, how do you successfully apply for that funding? As well as funding, there's also other considerations that a business might need to look at as well. So that's what we'll have a look at during the course of this session anyway. So what do we do? Well, in a normal day, the Access to Finance team, we work with growing businesses to support them, helping businesses with growth aspirations across the great county of Lancashire. So what we do is relatively straightforward really. So we put some nice arrows there at the bottom. It's to help sort of viable businesses that are looking to grow and to identify the right funder, and then hopefully acquire that funding and help the business to go and succeed. We do sort of focus on the sort of investment readiness part, and we do a fully funded 12-hour assist And what is involved in that is helping businesses with their business plans and forecasts and the applications for funding as well. Having said that, things have slightly changed. So if we could move on to the next slide, please, John. So what's changed? Well, it's fairly obvious, isn't it? Well, COVID-19 has happened, and Boost itself, the access to finance service itself, has changed somewhat. So there's been quite a lot of asks of businesses during this pandemic to make changes, to pivot is a popular word, diversification as well. So it would be a little bit hypocritical if Boost wasn't to do that. So what they've done is they've started the Ask for Help campaign, which has sort of opened the door to each and every and all business in Lancashire to see how they can be helped with a number of different projects and schemes and business advisors, so on and so forth. And that's with a view to making this service relevant. I put on the bottom there, do the right thing. A lot of people may already be aware that the funding itself is ERDF funded and normally limits itself to B2B businesses. Well, those ERDF shackles are off, I'll be pleased to say, and that means that we can help all businesses that we can. So, finance options. We're going to look at two in particular, but happy during the Q&A to discuss any other finance options and funders out there. But I think two that are probably the most relevant and pertinent at the moment is the Coronavirus Interruption Loan Scheme, known as CBILS, and more latterly, the Bounce Back Loan Scheme, BBILS or BBLS, whatever you want to call it. So we'll look at the key features and the eligibility criteria for each of these, and then how best to go about planning your application for them. Next slide, please, John. Right, I'm not going to read this out because I'm sure we all can read. And CBILS has been around for a few weeks now, and I don't know what people's experiences are with the CBILS funding scheme, but essentially it's kind of on the rails of the EFG scheme. So it's delivered by the British Business Bank, and on there's a number of different accredited lenders that were doing the Enterprise Finance Guarantee Scheme. So they were already teed up, lined up, and the interesting thing to note is that you know these lenders are using their own funds to deliver this. So the criteria is somewhat similar to the EFG scheme. So it's going to be an SME. It's going to be based in the UK with a turnover less than 45 million. And the majority of trading activity from general trading. Now, the interesting word that's been used with regards to accessing CBILS is viable. And I'll go back to the point before with regards to the actual delivery of this fund is by those 40 plus accredited lenders. And the truth of the matter is that the viability of the business really comes down to their viewpoint on whether the business is viable. Most would take the view that how was the business performing prior to COVID-19? Was it in a growth period? Was it a sustainable business? And that's really the things that they were looking to identify. So if they're looking at a business perhaps that was faltering, perhaps loss-making prior to COVID-19, they may take the view that unfortunately that might be a business that they're not able to support. So particularly with applications, CBILS applications to banks, they've obviously found sometimes that they will come a cropper with regards to the viability status. So the idea behind it really is that the funding itself will be able to help the business sort of navigate these murky waters. So the truth of the matter is we don't really know how long this is going to go on for. And it's been touched on before that, well, businesses maybe could last 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a month, 2 months, maybe even 3 months without any external cash being invested into the business. So really, when we're looking at these cases, we're looking at businesses that need that cash in order to keep going. But ultimately, on the other side of this pandemic, will be a business that will be able to continue to grow and to trade profitably. It's worth noting that there's a few excluded sectors, as there always is with these kind of things, and they're mentioned at the bottom of this slide. I'm not going to read it out. So if we move on to the next slide, please, John. Just a bit of overall criteria. Maximum borrowing is for £5 million, and the term loans can go up to 6 years, and that applies to asset finance too. More short-term funding requirements, like overdrafts and invoice finance, have been capped at 3 years. I think we've covered the viability bit. And I think one of the sort of key points is that the business would be able to take on one of these loans, and the government would be able to pay the interest and arrangement fees for the first year, known as BIP, the Business Interruption Payment, which the lenders would need to apply to British Business Bank in order to be reimbursed. That's just a technical point. Right, when we were talking about the lenders before, we're talking about each individual lender, one of those 40 accredited lenders, and they will apply their own pricing model. And this can vary. So if you were looking initially for CBILS from the bank, it's likely that you could get a CBILS package that is going to be much cheaper than if you were to approach an alternative lender. So remember that these lenders are working with their own funds that are under management, and oftentimes these are borrowed or come from different sources, so of their own particular pricing model that's attached to it. So the variation in cost on CBILS loans can vary for that reason. Next slide, please, John. So again, we were talking about CBILS. It's kind of run on the rails of the old EFG scheme, the Enterprise Finance Guarantee Scheme. And that was normally employed where there wasn't what the lenders generally look at as being tangible security. So that normally means bricks and mortar, assets on the balance sheet, or maybe even a residential property from the director shareholders. So where there wasn't that security, the EFG scheme was employed by lenders in order to put deals and facilities together that they normally wouldn't be able to do so. That's not an issue under the current CBIL offering, which is an improvement to make it more accessible. I think we've probably seen in the news that the requirement for PGs has been reduced, and particularly for facilities under 250k, lenders now are not asking for personal guarantees. And that's probably to make it a little bit more appealing to business owners that under normal circumstances probably would prefer not to take on debt, but they might realise that it's a necessity during these times. Facilities over 250,000, well, PGs may be required, and this comes down to the requirements and the credit policies of the lenders themselves. So CBILS, well, it's guaranteed 80% by the British Business Bank and Treasury. Now, that obviously means that the remaining 20% risk that is borne by the lender themselves. So they've obviously got to be mindful of their capital risk, and that does often feature in their credit appraisals and how they view any particular proposition. I put the small print at the bottom, so I thought I'd do it slightly bigger font and in bold, just to be clear. At the end of the day, these are loans. They're there to support businesses, to help them trade through these difficult times. But the British Business Bank is quite clear that the borrower remains 100% liable for the debt. We've talked a little bit before about the requirement or non-requirement for personal guarantees. And you may think, well, what does that mean when it really comes down to it? Well, ultimately, the bottom line is that these loans should and must be repaid. So next slide, please. So what have we got now? We've got the bounce back loan scheme. So that was introduced early on in the week. Again, it's managed by the British Business Bank and delivered mainly by the high street clearing banks. The reason why the bounce back loan scheme was introduced is it was probably felt, and my view as well to a certain degree, that there was delays in accessing CBILS. A lot of CBILS lenders were still working out their own credit policies, so they were still working out their own mechanisms in order to deliver this. And it was felt that maybe at the lower end of funding requirements, so sort of sub 50,000, that another solution was required. So that was the bounce back loan scheme, which we've probably heard a lot about in the last few weeks, in the run up to it being launched earlier this week. So again, it's support for SMEs. It's UK based, and the requirement is that the business must have been established by March of 2020. The other caveat really as well is that it's not using the CBILS scheme. However, it is notable that those businesses that may have received a CBILS loan could transfer that to a bounce back loan scheme. And you're probably thinking, well, what's the point in that? So for example, if you were able to get a CBILS loan scheme from an alternative lender, you could have been paying somewhere in the region of about 12–15% as their funds dictate. However, the costing of the bounce back loan scheme is recommended highly at 2.5%. It would be a cost saving exercise. In truth, for the first year, it's largely academic, as the interest repayments are made by the business bank anyway. But it's interesting to note that they've made this mechanism available to transfer, refinance any CBILS loans. Okay, so again, the same principle applies, is they're not looking to support businesses that are distressed, but are looking to support businesses that are able to continue to trade with the funding. So there's a few highlights there. I won't read them verbatim, but I think the interesting thing and the difference between this and the CBILS is this is 100% guaranteed by the government. So there is no capital risk to the lenders at all. The interest rate of 2.5 is quite attractive either way you look at it, with the arrangement fees and interest paid for the first year. No guarantees, of course. And I think another sort of pertinent point with this is that they've stipulated that there shouldn't be recovery options when trying to recoup funds, maybe in the instance of a default, and these protections over private residences and vehicles of the shareholders and directors of the business. Again, a little bit of small print at the bottom. The borrower remains 100% liable. That doesn't change. Next slide. So how do you go about applying for this funding? Well, they're two very distinct products. The first one, the bounce back loan scheme, it's very much designed to enable businesses to approach their existing bank. So that's what they need to do. Sometimes there is delays in doing that from what I hear, but if your requirement is less than £50,000, the quickest, easiest and simplest way is to apply with your bank. A lot of questions that we do tend to get asked is, well, can I have both? So what do we mean by 2 bites of the cherry? It's like, well, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll go for a quick, easy hit. Let's go for some low-hanging fruit. Let's go for a bounce back loan scheme at £50,000. Well, will that suffice? So if that isn't enough, what recourse do I have then? Can I then apply for a CBILS loan? Well, I think the important thing is, and I think Pam touched on this as well, is to understand your cash requirements. So people might be tempted to go for that quick hit, 50,000, see how things go. At this point in time, it's not clear as to whether there will be restrictions on businesses applying for CBILS after they've been successful with a bounce back loan scheme. There may be provision for this, but we're not sure at the moment, and we're waiting for clarity from the British Business Bank. So when we say short-term pain, long-term gain, perhaps it's worth, again, understanding your cash requirement. And if your requirement is more than £50,000, it may well be worth having a look at the CBILS scheme as opposed to the bounce back loan scheme. There is a little bit more that's required in terms of what these lenders will look for. And I think these are just flashing up now. So initially they'll want to know what the value of the borrowing is going to be, over what term. I think the terms are generally quite attractive at 5-6 years. They'll also want some kind of evidence that the business has been negatively affected by COVID-19, not necessarily just a business that's underperforming prior to the pandemic. Where will the funds be utilised and used? But as well, they'll also ask questions around what other mechanisms the businesses use to retain cash. These have been highlighted before in some ways, in terms of any rate relief, speaking to creditors, speaking to lenders, maybe speaking to your landlord. What else have you done as a business owner to make sure that you can retain as much cash in the business, and then look for some external finance as well. Again, we come back to the viability piece. Is the business viable? How was it performing prior to COVID-19? A little bit about businesses that have pivoted or diversified above and beyond what they do. We know this is a big ask for businesses that maybe have been doing the same thing for quite some time. I think we've chatted about this in the Q&A previously, and a lot of businesses have maybe had their hands forced a little bit to maybe go digital. So maybe if you're looking to do things on a digital platform and maybe you need funding to build the website, to do the marketing, and things of that nature, then that demonstrates that the business will, is looking to do that and will be a more viable proposition in terms of funding application. Next slide, please, John. So what have we got? What do they require? So this is maybe a bit more in depth than the business bounce back scheme, but they'll look for we put a business plan there, but in my view, what they want is an abbreviated version, which is basically how you're going to deal with the pandemic, and what other provisions have you put in place and how the funding will be used. So it's normally a little bit less than the standard business plan. Statutory accounts, management accounts, sort of flow through this really. Cash flow forecast, I think Pam's touched on that. But what's the need, what's the requirement, and is there ability to service the debt? They'll also have a look at your trade creditors position, and Crown position, HMRC, and other finance agreements and leases, just to make sure that the loan can be serviced. Another important thing it's worth noting that they do tend to have a look at the management team themselves. So it may be a relatively early stage business that has not quite established a good track record, but they're credible people that are supporting this business. And I think that does go a long way, and bringing out those points and who the management team is often can be a deciding factor in whether a lender's looking to support or not. Next slide, please. So what are the practical steps? So we've touched on these before, and the reason why it's worth having a look at these again, and I'm not going to sort of read them out, and you're probably familiar with them in terms of highlighting the importance of looking at these. But I think my view is there isn't one single silver bullet that will solve all these problems. It's probably a number of different mechanisms that you could use and benefits that are out there. So it may well be that you take some or all of these practical steps as well as looking to obtain funding to put into the business. So I think having a look at any and all avenues that are open to a individual eligible business is critical during these times. Next slide, please. So perhaps you've got the money. What happens next? Well, perhaps you need to have a look at your strategy, maybe to implement it. Sales and marketing, like we said, it could move to a more digital format. And maybe that's not necessarily your cup of tea, but that's what Boost are there for. So engage with Boost, speak to an advisor. They'll be able to guide you, signpost you to mentors, advisors, and skilled people in various areas. So ultimately, what we're asking for is, well, ask for help. That's what Boost are here for. Questions, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine?
Hey, yeah, can you hear me? I don't know if this headset works very well.
Yeah, a lovely view as well.
It's my garden. My question is, I'm a very, very new business. I'm not a limited company. I don't have a history with accounts and things. Is there any help for people like me who are right at the bottom of the ladder? And is there any assistance for training?
Sorry, Mike, if you want to answer that.
Yeah, well, there certainly is help and support. Obviously, Boost is a good place to go and a starting point. In terms of supporting an application for funding, that's where access to finance comes in. So we will help and support in that regard with business plans and forecasts. But the truth of the matter is you will know your business better than any external advisor anyway. So it's a bit of help and hand-holding during the course of these things. But certainly, yeah, with regards to other support, then certainly Boost is a good place to start. John, you're itching to say something.
Sorry, sorry, you can't help it. So the thing is, Catherine, there is a lot of support out there. So Mark alluded to it before. There is mentoring. Which is
I've got that. I've got Boost for the advice, but it was the financial aspect that I was wondering about. Is there funding available for brand new businesses to maybe support training and things like that?
There is some training, some free training available through the Lancashire Enterprise Partnership. So if you contact us afterwards, what we'll do is we'll put you in contact with them. And they're running some additional programs out now because of the COVID-19.
Yeah. All right.
So are you actually on a mentoring program with or via OSCB partners?
I've got Tony Roberts.
Okay.
Lovely.
Can I just add into what John said? I mean, at the moment, there's so many webinars that are available. For and the criteria has been relaxed, in terms of the majority of the schemes they were just business to business, but all of the criteria has been relaxed at the moment to help as many businesses across Lancashire as possible. So I would just keep an eye on the website and look at this. I think there's a webinar near enough every day from the Boost programme, and they're all free to access, like this one is. And I just keep an idea in terms of what training you want. I mean, a lot of people have really high demand for the digital training at the moment. And I think it's just a case of absorb as much as you can on that. I mean, I don't know whether you were asking whether you'd actually be qualified to raise finance or whether you
that was the thing.
Yes, Mark, would a new business qualify for any of the criteria? If they've not got much history?
Well, the Bounce Back Loan Scheme stipulates that the business must have been established before March 2020. So if that's the case, then that may well be an option. Doesn't necessarily guarantee that the funding would be there.
Yeah.
But if not, there still is other funding options out there if you've got a business that you feel can trade or even grow during these difficult times. And one of the sort of key products for early stage businesses is probably a startup loan scheme, which is sort of relatively easy to get onto, and might need a little bit of support in getting there, but certainly that would be one of the options that I would be looking at now if I was you. Yeah, because I'm looking to do training with ISO 9001, and obviously that's not cheap training. It's not the sort of thing you can just go on a webinar for. So it was that kind of thing that I was looking for assistance with. So should I just get in touch with you outside of this? Yeah, definitely, Catherine. Just drop me a line. I'm sure the guys at Cube can get us connected and have a chat and see how we can support or signpost and all of the above. All right, thank you.
Also, Catherine, group chat's not just for chutney, so put your business details on there as well. We're all in it together, and that's not just a trotted out phrase. We sincerely believe that, and that's why some of us have not slept much in the last 6 weeks, because we've been in a war effort, and we'll all get ourselves through. And if any county can help each other better than
it's Lancashire.
It's Lancashire. And hashtag berate, but pop your details of your business in the group chat, then we're aware of you then.
Okay, well, I'm a virtual assistant, so if anybody's struggling with the cash flow, the projections and needing things documenting, that's the kind of thing that I'm here to help with, because obviously people are working harder from home than they would if they went to the office. They're juggling families. So if there's anything that I can make life easier, and you can dip in and out if you just need me through the COVID period, you just dip in and out. You're not contracted to use me like you would a member of staff.
Well, that's awesome. Get your details on there, and let's all get connected on LinkedIn too, by the way.
Thank you.
So the parting notes really are, really hope you've enjoyed the webinar. It will be recorded. If there's items that you feel as though you've missed and you want to watch again, then they'll be available to view again on the Boost website. As the slogan says, ask for help. So you've got our details now anyway. So if is there any help and support that you need, then please talk to us, and we'll either we'll signpost you to the right areas, or alternatively go onto the Boost website and they'll put you through into the BRMs, and the BRMs will do a cracking job in understanding what your issues and problems are, and then signposting you to some of the other programs. Boost has a heck of a lot of activities. It's not just some like 3 groups as the mentoring, the GSP, and the Boost Bespoke programs. They've got partnerships with some great organisations like UCLan and Lancaster University. So they're offering a lot of help-funded activities. And once the BRMs understand what your issues and problems are, then they'll be able to point you in the right direction.
And next Friday, we've got the 3rd in our little series of 3 webinars. So we started off with strategy. Today we've had finance. Next week it's about people and why we think people matter. People do matter, and it's going to be an opportunity to look at things from a HR angle, but also looking at the wellness of your staff and how you're treating your staff, and also some bit of conversation about skill swapping too. So we've got that next Friday. So we'll send the link out to that, obviously, when we send the email to you a little bit later on. Enormous thanks to our 2 amazing guest speakers. So we had Mark from Access to Finance, and we had our very own Pam Duxbury as well. Pam's our finance lead from Cube Thinking. So if you do need a financial phone a friend, she's there. She's a Jedi, as you can see, and she doesn't bite. So we will send you an email which will have a little bit of a feedback questionnaire. We listened to the feedback from last time. It wasn't brutal. We were quite surprised. We were quite shocked. We went through it again before to check we'd not missed a trick. But I'm sure there's ways we could have done this in a much better way. There's ways that we can learn. So please be honest with us. Give us some feedback with how the session went today. There's been a lot of content which has been shared, and that's why perhaps asking for a copy of the slides might be useful, just if there's stuff for you to digest upon. But Pam, thank you so much for making finance interesting. Mark, thank you for so much for letting people be aware of what options are out there. And I think when we say ask for help, I hope we've offered a little bit of help in here. We will stay behind if anybody wants to chat from here on, by all means. Last time a few folk wanted a natter, but crucially, have a wonderful weekend and let's give us a big wave.